In a good news for government employees, the newly elected National Democratic Alliance or NDA government may guarantee up to 50% of last basic pay as pension to central government staffers. A committee set up by Modi government has drafted a report on ways to increase benefits under the National Pension Scheme as against the current market-based returns. Now, panel headed by Finance Secretary TV Somanathan in March of 2023 suggested ways to increase pensionary benefits without reverting to the fiscally disastrous non-contributory old pension scheme. Now, the committee in its report has submitted to the government that the new scheme that the suggestions have been made is largely in line with Andhra Pradesh's NPS model, which was enacted in 2023. With me in the studio is my colleague Kartik Malhotra. Kartik, I want to begin by asking you, this was of course a major bone of contention between the opposition, the main opposition Congress party and the BJP. But with a pension which is now attested to the tune of 50% of the basic pay and a guarantee on that, I think should solve out that political hurdle.
I think, this Andhra Pradesh hybrid model is absolutely a win-win. So you don't really have the fiscal burden of accommodating 50% of the last drawn as pension, and at the same time you're looking at contribution coming in from government employees, thereby helping the government at the state level and at the center level build a certain corpus. That corpus can be invested in annuities and pretty much the pension pays for itself.
Okay.
Now the only thing is, if this is all going into debt products which are safer assets to invest in, then the yield is not going to be as high and as significant to be able to make this scheme completely self-reliant. But at the same time, if this is invested in market-linked opportunities, then obviously the upside is unlimited. And the downside, perhaps we could see some years of a bear run where you might actually have a downside, and then the upside through equities can compensate for those down years.
All right, so Praveen Chakravarty, Chairman of All India Professionals Congress, is also joining us on the show. Mr. Chakravarty, does this solve the major political hurdle for you? Are you happy with what the government panel has suggested? There will be a minimum guarantee and it will be to the tune of 50%, and so this should be it.
Yes, I think this was something that was expected, which is, and I personally opposed the reversion to old pension scheme, even though it was Congress governments in a few states that had actually done that. But I must point out that at that time, I was arguing that the old OPS versus NPS as a political debate, as if it is something to woo voters, was completely meaningless, and I argued that it didn't have much to do with elections. And I must say that I stand vindicated now, because guess what? The Andhra Pradesh model, where Jagan Reddy brought in this, he's been voted out. And in Rajasthan, where the Congress government, and in Chhattisgarh, they brought back the old pension scheme, they got voted out too. So it's not really connected, and this is what I was arguing. Now, coming to what the new, I don't know, I haven't seen the final draft of the Somanathan committee recommendation, but I do think it is a reasonable middle ground. I think the complaint was that under the NPS, pensioners, retired government bureaucrats and government servants were left to the vagaries of the market. And with this, they are assured of a certain minimum, which I think is reasonable. But at the same time, we can't go back to the old pension scheme, which is fiscally completely reckless.
Hi, Mr. Chakravarty, Kartik Malhotra here. So while I completely agree with you, I think the old pension scheme is absolutely imprudent to go ahead with, either at a state level or at the center level. But what I want to ask you is that eventually, which organization as part of the state or the central government is going to manage this contribution which comes from government staffers, and where does it get invested? What is the ratio in which it should either look at equity markets or it should look at debt products?
No, see, first of all, even under NPS, there is already that process that is going on right now, which is the contributions are being invested. I think the big argument was, should they be completely exposed to the swings of the market? Now, whether they should be, 70% debt and 30% equities, or 80-20 or 60-40, I actually don't think the government should dictate any of that. This should be left to professionally run pension fund managers and pension fund organizations, as it is across the world. In every country in the world, These are done professionally, and hopefully they'll be, if it's professionally run, it'll be efficiently managed, and the government would not have to cough up money if it falls short of the minimum obligation of 50% of their last drawn salary.
Okay.
So I don't believe that we should actually dictate. Neither do I think it should actually be a diktat from the union government, the central government. The states should be left to it should be left to the states to decide how to run this, manage this pension money, so that we have a healthy competition among states and they can learn from each other. They can learn from the best practices of other states.
Should employees have any say in where their contribution is invested, or do you think it should only be run by the professional bodies, with the only interface being the state, either at the state level or at the center?
At this stage of India's development, I think it's best left to professionals.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And in case of any shortfall in pension corpus for guaranteed money, where does that money really come from, sir? If it comes from the government coffers, then how is this hybrid model any different from OPS, apart from the contributory and the non-contributory factor of it?
Well, if there is a shortfall, the government has to pitch in, that's for sure. But the way it is different is, and that is why it imposes this discipline on fund management, because the government will presumably ensure that they don't have to cough up extra if there's a shortfall, for which the pension funds have to be managed more efficiently. Hence, it imposes a natural discipline on efficient pension fund management. And that is exactly why I'm saying the government should stay out of prescribing rules and diktats over how and what the ratio is and all of that. It should just be left to the pension fund managers.
Mr. Chakravarty, it's also important at this point to get your views on what happens when we say that the minimum amount which will be drawn as pension would be 50% of the last drawn basic. Now, is this minimum 50% also likely to go up if the funds in which this money has been invested are yielding higher returns? Or do you think that is something that the government should keep as rainy day reserve on years where perhaps, or months where the yield has not been that great, because at the end of the day, this is market linked?
No, it's the word minimum, isn't it? So the word minimum gives you the
answer. So does that mean that in case markets have returned a 60% return over time on the corpus, then it's not going to be 50%, it's going to be 60% what the pensioners get?
Absolutely, and that's how it should be. It is their money, and if it's managed efficiently and it returns higher, the money should go back to them.
So then, does this put certain employees at risk, that those who retired in a certain year, and this is where the compounding effect comes into play and the vagaries of the market come into play? Is it possible that somebody who retires in 2025 versus somebody who retires in 2026 at the same last drawn basic can theoretically draw different pension amounts?
See, when we go through a transition phase, these things are bound to be there. We will have to wait for the fine print to see how, what they call in technical terms, how this is grandfathered, and how, how is it going to apply at what level, which year, and how, and all of that. But I think any transition from an existing scheme to a new scheme is bound to throw up certain differences, and I think we should be okay with that.
So is that something that will politically be accepted by states, and is that something that government employees themselves would be all right accepting, that their peers 1 or 2 years apart may actually end up drawing a higher or a lower pension?
Yes, it is. See, it is almost like saying, let us assume that, income tax thresholds are increased from 5 to 6 lakhs. Okay. So then the person who's earning 6.5 lakh gets taxed, but the person earning 5.5 lakhs or 6 lakhs does not get taxed. So then we can start to say why this difference. I mean, when you put a certain dividing line, there's bound to be people on either side of the dividing line, which is perfectly fine. I think the most important lesson that I want people to take out from this is actually a fiscal issue that should only be resolved with the fiscal situation in mind by public economists, and not make it political, which is what was happening with this whole OPS versus NPS for the last 3 years. So I'm actually very glad that we're putting an end to that debate. It is not political, it does not get votes, or it does not harm votes. Let's be very clear. Let's look at it purely from what is fiscally more prudent to do.
All right. Mr. Chakravarty, so from what I'm assuming and what I'm hearing is that in case this hybrid model is enacted, there will be political consensus for those who so far have not really liked the NPS. But I want to also quickly talk to you, and given that it all depends on the market vagaries. Let's assume on the downside, markets don't give you returns for 2 or 3 consecutive years as is expected. In which case, what could be the fiscal burden of such a guarantee, sir? Could it then also dent the coffers of the government? Such was the case in OPS, and it could perhaps be the same with the hybrid model.
Yeah, see, okay, so 2 things. First is, you talked about a political consensus. I must point out, as a member of the manifesto committee of the Congress party in the elections, we did not promise a reversion to the old pension scheme in the Congress manifesto. So that alone answers your question on what our stand will be when the government comes up with something like this. Second, if the returns fall short of 50%, let us assume it may fall short of 50%. Let's say it gets up to 30%, okay? It's still 30% more than the old pension scheme. The old pension scheme had 0. It was all coming out of the government coffers, isn't it? So it is still fiscally more prudent than the old pension scheme. And yes, we will have to make up for the shortfall, which is okay, which I think is something that the government servants deserve. And it will also pick up and naturally impose a certain discipline on fund management to better and efficiently manage. It's exactly like what LIC does with its, with its corpus, isn't it? LIC's performance has improved dramatically over the last 10, 20 years, if you actually think about it. So that's exactly like that is what I expect to happen in this case.
So one downside that I see potentially, and I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but again, linking it back to politics, do you think there's a higher probability of this corpus being invested back in public sector companies, PSBs, for example, because it also then acts as, as a good tool to sort of prop those companies up and their market valuations up? Or do you think the politics will allow for very fair fund management like is done in the corporate world?
Yes, see, it is. I mean, again, I go back to the example of LIC, isn't it? I mean, LIC was being used to prop up certain PSU stocks or to buy certain IPOs of certain PSU companies and those types of things. And over time, I think it got a little bit more market efficient. Remember, now we have a big change politically from the last 10 years. We will actually have an active democracy and an opposition. So we're not going to let the government run away by investing all this pension money in either PSUs or their friends' stocks.
Okay. And as far as politics of this is concerned, Mr. Chakravarty, you said it's not a part of Congress, or it wasn't a part of Congress's manifesto, but it was, of course, a poll promise in Rajasthan. It was a poll promise in Chhattisgarh. In Rajasthan, of course, Congress government did not come back to power. But this continues to be a political hot potato every now and then. I want to understand from you, is this something that will Congress party pick this issue up? With now new NDA government at the center, the hybrid scheme may be accepted, may not be accepted. But are you looking to take this up with the ruling NDA now?
See, okay, what are the facts? Yes, the Congress party reverted to the old pension scheme in Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh. We lost the elections. Also remember, we did not promise old pension scheme in Karnataka and Telangana, and we won the elections there. Jagan Reddy went to the contributory pension fund and he lost the election. So I don't think there's any correlation that one can draw. Second, like I said, we have not promised an old pension scheme in the manifesto. We want to be fiscally disciplined, and that we will encourage fiscal discipline. Third, we have to see what the fine print is. You can't extract a blanket approval from me now on what I have not even seen, which is I've only read in newspaper reports and based on what your reports are telling me,
right,
what this potential solution could be. We will have to see the fine print, but generally, yes, as long as it's fiscally more disciplined, I think that should be welcome.
All right, Praveen Chakravarty, thank you very much, sir. The move, of course, is likely to make about 8.6 million pensioners in the country happy if there is a minimum guarantee of 50% of the basic pay and a new hybrid pension scheme does come into place. Thank you very much for taking time out this afternoon and for joining us here on News 9 Live.